Ukraine, the Beijing Olympics, and New York's vaccine mandate. I'm Cecily Fernandez, and this is a Square Circle. Hello and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Cecily Fernandez. Joining us today are progressive Erin Matson, Executive Director of Repro Action. Erin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Independent political advisor, Rina Shah. Rina, great to have you.
Hey there, thanks for having me.
And conservative publisher of Liberty Island Books, David Swindle. David, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
This week, President Biden confronted Russian President Vladimir Putin over his aggression toward Ukraine. Here's a story from Reuters.
That is not on the table.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday said putting American troops on the ground in Ukraine to deter a potential Russian invasion was, quote, not on the table, particularly without the support of NATO allies.
It would depend upon what the rest of the NATO countries were willing to do as well. But the idea the United States is going to unilaterally use force to confront Russia invading Ukraine is not in the cards right now. But
Biden said there would soon be high-level meetings with Russia and at least 4 major NATO allies to discuss the future of Russia's concerns about NATO and to try to bring down the temperature on Ukraine's eastern front, where tens of thousands of Russian troops have massed. The Kremlin has denied having intentions to attack Ukraine and says its troop buildup is defensive in nature. Speaking to reporters outside the White House, Biden said he made it clear to Russian President Vladimir Putin during their nearly 2-hour virtual meeting on Tuesday that there would be economic consequences like none before if Russia invades Ukraine.
Rina, let's start with you. Do you think President Biden was successful in his talks with Putin in deterring Russia from military action against Ukraine?
Well, I believe time will tell if Biden's strategy of dealing with President Vladimir Putin would be successful. This is a type of scenario where it's a hurry up and wait. And I really regret saying that on many levels, because there is great strategic action the United States can take through NATO and other allies. However, the truth of the matter is that this is exactly how Vladimir Putin operates in terms of how he sees his real sort of strength in that area, in that region of the world. When we talk about what he did in Crimea, what he's done at the border there in Ukraine is not surprising at all. Nearly 100,000 troops is no joke. So what we know here is that in a 2-hour call, I'm not sure much was accomplished. We know that it happened. We know that President Biden says he's standing firmer, stronger. But what were the real sort of products of that call that he wanted? What was the results? We don't know. There's so little known right now. And of course, there's a democracy summit happening here in the US that Biden has convened. And there are a great many critics about the United States even having standing to hold such a summit. There have been many people excluded, countries that don't deserve to be at the table, the United States has said. I am somebody that really believes in democracy. I know that Vladimir Putin does not. And that is where we have to really see the situation for what it is. Can the United States be successful in deterring Vladimir Putin's plan? And I really frankly believe that we don't have much standing to do so. And I hope President Biden is successful, but I think this is a scenario where this is so premature and only time will tell. But certainly Ukraine is needing the world's support right now. They're on the fast track to NATO membership, as we know. There are a lot of processes in place right now that are happening that are not in the public eye that could certainly stop the Russian aggression we see taking place right now. But again, this is just so fast in many ways that I would not be surprised if Vladimir Putin were to take a further step. I think this is just part of his playbook.
David, what do you think? I mean, President Biden seems to have indicated that he is reluctant or unwilling to use military force, at least, not without NATO support. Do you think that taking that off the table, weakens his hand in dealing with Putin?
I'm not so worried about that in particular. And as far as Putin and Biden go, foreign policy threat wise, Putin is not the person that I'm most concerned about with Biden. I think of all the threats out there, Putin is probably one of the people that Biden has most of a clear-eyed view of. I'm very unhappy with Biden about all kinds of things foreign policy wise. I'm not going to forgive him over Afghanistan. But I think from all the things that I've been hearing from Biden say over the years about Putin, that he knows that Putin, is a thug, who is a KGB killer who will kill people in very painful ways. He's a very cruel, evil man. And Biden, while I think generally is going to be awfully naive with a lot of people and a lot of global actors, here in this case, I think he knows who Putin is, and he knows how far he can go in pushing back on Putin, because he knows the degree that Trump was soft on Putin is a generous way of saying it. So he knows that he can be as hard on Putin as he needs to be, and that the media is going to let him get away with that. So this particular case and Putin and Biden in general, it's not something that I think we should be overly worried about as far as problems that Biden is not going to be able to handle properly.
Erin, what do you think? I mean, given what happened in 2014 with Crimea, do you think that that's potentially something that we could see here with Biden threatening only economic sanctions? Do you think that he should go further than that, or do you feel pretty good about his handling of the situation with Putin so far?
I think to date that Biden has turned and righted the ship in the right direction. The previous president acted like a puppet of this authoritarian thug. I want to echo David's analysis of Vladimir Putin. So I think, the fact of the matter is that in Ukraine, with 100,000 troops at the border that Putin has amassed, there's differing reports, and it's really up for grabs if he is going to go invade or not. And there's reports that, of course, the troops are right there, but there's also reports that there's not the food and the fuel to back it up for an immediate invasion. So, but what we do know is that this is an authoritarian dictator who certainly has plans to expand into Russia, and who is very bristled at the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. And NATO has that right to fundamental self-determination. If they want to be a part of NATO and NATO agrees, they should be welcomed into the fold. I honestly think that parsing out about what Biden is or is not doing is not the core issue that we should be focusing on right now. The issue is that the world is in a dangerous spot right now. We've got this authoritarian leader of Russia. We've also got China making incursions into the Western Hemisphere for the first time. And I think that we are in a time now in 2021 where we've been closer to the conditions that could allow for a world war than in my lifetime to date.
Okay. We'll let that be the last word on that. But also this week, the Biden administration announced a partial boycott of the Beijing Olympic Games. Here's a story from NBC News.
When the Olympic flame is lit in Beijing, American athletes will be there to compete. But neither President Biden nor any other U.S. officials will be attending. The White House announcing a diplomatic boycott of the Games to protest China's human rights abuses, including crushing the democracy movement in Hong Kong, threatening Taiwan, what the U.S. calls genocide against the minority Uyghurs, and the recent disappearance of tennis star Peng Shuai after she accused a top Beijing official of sexual assault. Human rights groups wanted a total boycott, as Jimmy Carter did in 1980, when he kept athletes home from the Moscow Olympics after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan.
Erin, do you think the diplomatic boycott of the Games goes far enough in response to the various human rights violations by the Chinese government?
Cecily, I think it's a great start, and I was really thrilled to see the diplomatic boycott announced by the Biden administration and to see so many other countries coming on board, including Australia, Britain. France has said it's sitting out, which I think is really disappointing. And but there's been countries that are coming on board. And I have to take a moment of personal privilege as a lifelong feminist activist and leader to say that, as somebody who's been advocating for Title IX and girls in sports and what happens when girls are in sports and the leadership that they take, I mean, we got to give credit where credit is due to the U.S. Women's Tennis Association for really kicking this off and getting this started, for saying that they would no longer play in China following the disappearance of Peng Shuai after she made allegations that a former high-up official in the Chinese Communist Party had sexually assaulted her. And we still don't know to this day if she's safe. I would like to call attention to the fact that the Men's Tennis Association never issued such a statement. But I do think, and that is one story in a broader context where we know that there's the genocide that's happening at the hands of the Chinese, targeting the Uyghur population, and just a range of human rights abuses. So I think it's really important to sit out and say, for the diplomats to say this isn't normal. I do appreciate the sympathy that people have with athletes who've been training their whole lives to play in the moment. And in particular that, the last couple Olympics have been screwed up because of the COVID crisis. So it's a good step.
Rina, what do you think? Would you like to see President Biden in general? I mean, this is a somewhat symbolic gesture, although China does seem to be very angry about the diplomatic boycott. But do you think, given the numerous human rights violations that Erin mentioned, that that we maybe should have been a little bit ahead of the games and considered possibly moving the games out of China?
Well, I don't think it's that simple. I think, the games are slated to be there, and they're happening, and this is the strongest action that could happen. China has been committing genocide. This is a very, very strong action against what the Chinese would consider not a half measure at all by any stake. And so it's to really solidify what we intend to stand for as a country. And what do we stand for? We stand against countries that are committing these atrocious acts. When we talk about how we deal with China, there's a lot of bipartisan consensus. Look in Congress and you hear, for example, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Tom Cotton agreeing on what I mentioned earlier as half measures. This diplomatic boycott is good. A total boycott, as some would hope, would include American companies. Perhaps those will follow. We have the free markets here, and they'll do what they will. Globally, we need people, athletes, big pro figures, and frankly, just celebrities to draw attention to what is happening there. It's definitely a start that Britain, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada have joined us in boycotting these Olympics, our governments, but it's certainly not the end. And I know that there will be stronger action. I just really, at this point, don't know what could be stronger. And I'm happy to see this diplomatic boycott. What I am a bit unhappy about is the debate kind of taking place. And it's coming from the sort of extremes of both sides saying, okay, this diplomatic boycott is not enough. Well, where does the action begin? This is an action. It's a good action. China certainly is guilty of so many human rights crimes, and we've got to start calling it out. I haven't seen strong action in my lifetime, to be honest. And I think it's been, since the 80s? I might be mistaken on that, since the last diplomatic boycott.
David, what do you think about the boycott? Do you think it's a good start, or you think more could be done?
Well, let's just put it bluntly. I mean, China is enslaving people because they're Muslims. That's what China is doing. And we're having a debate about if we want to go and enjoy watching the big, strong men throw the heavy balls around. And let's watch the young women athletes run around the track. Meanwhile, we're just going to ignore and just call it euphemisms of human rights abuses when this country, China, which is a slave state, it enslaves its people. It brutalizes its women. And we're just going to have the usual conversation about, oh, it's the Olympics and, oh, human rights abuses at the country that it's being held in. Okay, but we want to just keep being entertained by our global Olympics, and ignoring that this China that gives us such cheap products that we love getting at Walmart, nice and cheap. Get your t-shirt for $10, $8, whatever. But we know why it's so cheap, because it's subsidized by a slave economy that's really no morally better than when we as a nation enslaved people.
Well, finally, New York City enacted the nation's most restrictive vaccine mandate so far. Here's CBS News with the story.
The New York mayor today called his mandate requiring all private workers be fully vaccinated, a preemptive strike against the cold weather and the new Omicron variant.
Look, this is how we put health and safety first, by ensuring that there is a vaccine mandate that reaches everyone universally in the private sector.
The mandate will affect 184,000 businesses, but will not apply to people working from home, and there will be no testing alternative.
David, I'll go to you first. How do you think New York businesses will respond to this mandate?
Well, I feel like New York culture in general has already pretty well adapted to it. And I imagine most New Yorkers are not having the kind of culture crisis, the fight over vaccination, the 1% of Americans on Twitter are having. So as much as this news story is going to be another or thing to go back and forth about, are the COVID mandates going too far? I imagine the New Yorkers themselves are probably going to be, they're fine with it. They know what they're getting from their government in New York City. They know.
Erin, what do you think about that? I mean, I think that in New York, among some populations, I think that, as far as people having both doses, it is as low as, maybe 40 or 50%. So, what do you think what kind of impact do you think this is gonna have?
Well, Cecily, I'd like to take a broader step back and just say that we know through data that when companies have individually put mandates in place, they work, and that vaccination rates skyrocket up, and to the point that we're exceeding more than 100,000 new cases of COVID a day, again in the United States. This is an urgent thing, and vaccination is one of the best ways out of the horrors of this pandemic. And so I really have to applaud. I am not a fan of Bill de Blasio, and I don't think hardly anyone in New York is a fan of Bill de Blasio. And, I'm a progressive. I can't stand him. But I got to give him respect where credit is due, that to leave it all out on the field as he's leaving his mayorship, and because he leaves at the end of the year, and to really put in place a mandate with teeth where there's not a gray area. And, a vaccine mandate is not the same thing as a mask mandate, but the issue with in places where masking has been inconsistent or there hasn't been clear guidance from governments, I think it's harder on businesses because it leaves businesses to have to fight it out for themselves and to enforce it. It could be very uncomfortable in establishments. So to have a uniform policy, I think, is helpful. Now, directly to your question about how will this be for business? I mean, everybody knows we're in the middle of a labor shortage and it's really tough. So I do have empathy for business owners who are just trying to make sure that they have enough workers to come to the fore. But the reality is we as a nation need to grow up and get our shots and put this pandemic to bed.
Rina, what do you think about that? How do you think businesses are going to respond? And also the other aspect of the vaccine mandate regarding children as young as 5 being vaccinated before any indoor dining or entertainment. That seems to go much further than we've heard in other types of mandates. What do you think about that? Do you think there's a chance that, by doing something so aggressive that it could backfire and people just ignoring it?
Well, I'd like to start by saying it was less than 24 hours ago that the United States Senate just voted 52 to 48, I believe, to block President Biden's vaccine mandate for private businesses. So that's really big. This is something that has been so tricky. I've studied public health at the graduate level, and I can tell you, as somebody who believes in science, is married to medicine, surrounded by physicians who genuinely believe that science has led us in the right direction direction on this vaccine, and we trust vaccines. That's important. Americans do have a tradition of trusting vaccines. What we see in the current political climate, I don't think is fully representative of how Americans feel around the country about what it means to put something in your body, and how that's really enforced by a government authority. I think in general, most Americans feel that we are at where we made it to where we are at this point in time. And we're certainly not post-pandemic. Let's remember that. But people do recognize that vaccines have benefit us, no doubt, throughout this COVID-19 pandemic, despite the variant. So here we are at the Omicron variant, and people are being asked to trust science again. And there's new headlines such as you may need a fourth booster. I just received my booster after having 2 doses of the Moderna vaccine earlier this year. I trust these boosters. I trust the vaccine because I know that the vaccine saves lives by making the severity of the COVID-19 far less than it could be. It is keeping people out of hospitals, and we need to remind people that vaccines, while they may not have yet eliminated COVID-19, we're seeing these variants because there are so many out there who are not vaccinated. So what's happening in New York is certainly being called into question even by physicians. There are many people out there who do worry about our freedom and our autonomy. If we open the door on letting government really regulate what goes in our body at the adult stage, then what else? But I would argue that, we, again, have had a very strong relationships to vaccines, and we are where we are as a society because of vaccination. Let's not forget, I'm the parent, Erin mentioned she's a parent earlier. I'm the parent of a child that just entered the public school system in September for the first time. There are mandatory vaccinations that we have been giving our children for a very long time, and that have kept them safe and strengthened our society's ability to fight deadly illnesses. So while this vaccine mandate certainly is a tricky one, what's it mean to have to ask private businesses to enforce? It's all very tough. It's a tough public debate, but I think the bottom line is this, that with each of us, we should really do our utmost to articulate to our friends and neighbors that vaccines save society. They save each one of us, and they save society. So are they really a bad thing? No, they are not. And we should all encourage everybody to get vaccinated. That's the bottom line. Business will follow suit when it makes sense for them economically.
I'm going to differ, sir, a little bit from what my colleague Rina said here regarding. I think actually that the mandates and the continued discussion, I think at this point, actually, the pandemic is actually kind of over. And when I say that, I don't mean it from the position of many of my friends on the right that have been denying it and saying terrible things about vaccine. I'm coming more from the perspective of my friend like Noah Rothman of Commentary. He had a wonderful article earlier a few weeks back pointing out that enough people have been vaccinated now and are waiting their second dose of being vaccinated, that, and particularly the old people that are at the greatest risk of dying, that we've hit that point of the pandemic of that we were trying to reach, but people haven't realized it yet because we're still focused on, because we're still moving so slowly that we haven't caught up on it on the real world and realizing that it's time to gradually start moving towards other issues now. I mean, for many months, I was in a panic trying to convince my right-wing friends, no, you need to get vaccinated, and no, you're spreading disinformation, and no, the vaccine will save your life, please. And at this point, I've just kind of given up on those conversations. I think most of the people that are going to get vaccinated now, the arguments have been made, and they've been vaccinated, and enough people now have been vaccinated that we're at a point with the pandemic that it's time for us to obviously keep looking at the new variants and adjusting, but there's other issues in the world going on that we need to start shifting our attention back to again, I think.
We're going to move on and take some questions from our viewers. Alan Lyons asks, should the military option against Putin be taken completely off the table, or should it be a last resort? We touched on this a bit, but Rina, let me go back to you on this military option. Should we not take it completely off the table?
Well, This is a tough one. You've caught me at a point where I have to sort of say, yes, I made the majority of my career around a lot of neocons and was all about keeping America safe with military action. But I'm so tired of seeing our women and men go over to other parts of the world and lose their lives on battlefields. And I just don't think military action is something we should jump to. Not at this point. I think right now it's being handled as best as possible. Like I said in the earlier part of the show, the Biden administration has said that they're doing everything possible to really enforce Ukrainian territorial integrity. What more could we want at this point? I think it's too early, and military action should not be on the table at this point. Anyone who's sort of jumping to that is not really thinking about the diplomatic action we can take and the strategic action that is needed genuinely from allies as well.
Erin, what do you think? Should military option be left on the table at least?
So I'm a pacifist. I'm part of the left, and I'm very much anti-war. And if there were a war, I'd probably be out in the streets protesting it. That said, just in terms of a theoretical statement of taking it totally off the table, I don't think that's smart. And I'm thinking a lot about what happened in Afghanistan with the disastrous withdrawal. I think that telegraphing to governments or rogue actors that one is not going to take action is not a good policy and not a way forward, particularly when you're dealing with an authoritarian strongman like Putin. He responds to strength. And so I'm going to give a both and answer. I mean, expect to see me out protesting in the streets if there is a war, but at the same time, I don't think that I don't think that's how you talk to him, is to say, no, we would never do that.
David, what do you think? Erin suggesting Putin understands strength. So should the military option, getting back to our viewers' questions, so the military option against Putin be completely taken off the table, or should it be a last resort?
Well, I don't think you need to necessarily think about them as either, because I now see the so-called military option that we talk about as more kind of the obsolete option. You know, as I've stumbled around in this, I'm kind of the hawkish conservative, you know, Middle East stuff and Israel, Zionism. That's sort of my realm that I've been in the last 10 years. And the thing that's really interested me in learning is that conventional warfare has kind of been replaced by espionage agencies. They fought the Cold War and they still fight the wars today. And now we just have KGB Putin running Russia as, you know, as I mentioned earlier, as sort of a mafia don. And that's really what espionage agencies kind of are, is just criminal gangs doing stuff behind the scenes, you know. So don't worry about war with Russia, because a World War II, Vietnam type war, even Iraq war is kind of obsolete in the era of hackers and Bitcoin and all of this crap today, you know.
Well, we are now at a point where we can hear your most underreported story of the week. Rina, can I start with you on your most underreported story?
Well, this isn't really quite underreported, but there's been a drip drop of information coming out from the January 6th Select Committee that's in Congress investigating the actions of January 6th and the lead up to that, the insurrection that day. And what we're finding out from the committee is quite shocking in nature. There was a PowerPoint slideshow made. We've learned, I believe it was between yesterday and today, of actions that could be taken on January 6th by then Vice President Pence to keep President Biden from taking office. One of those actions was part of a strategic plan that would have entailed the White House declaring a national security emergency. That's very concerning. And then also we've learned things such as sitting Congressman Matt Gaetz and big figure Steve Bannon. Goodness, I can't believe he used to be a Breitbart world at all. But really, what I really found most shocking is that they were talking about raising an army of patriots and 4,000 shock troops to take over the government. And wow, how these people have not been arrested for statements that we now know have been made public. I really believe our agencies, such as the FBI, should act swiftly and really restore justice, it seems. It feels like it's missing for some people that were part of the actions of January 6th.
Okay. Erin, your most underreported story of the week?
Yeah, so today, Josh Duggar, the former head of the Family Research Council Action, was convicted on child pornography possession charges. And I would like to remind folks, if they weren't already aware, that his parents came forward and claimed that Josh had told them, had admitted to molesting underage girls previously in his life. And there were a number of different girls who came forward and said that he raped them. And I think it's really important to probe this and to be clear about this, because the Family Research Council is a very resourced group with chapters all around the country. And it's one of the primary pushes of so-called sexual morality. And I don't say this as a gotcha. I mean, I take no pleasure in this. I find this entire story sickening. But I think what it says is it really shows the true rot that is at the core of the anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ agenda, that this is about sexual violence and pressure. And I think it's absolutely revolting to see how there has not been real forceful denunciation of this within conservative quarters. So that's my top story of the week. I see a clear line between this as well as what we've seen with pedophilia and the Roman Catholic Church. And that as somebody who's confirmed Catholic, it just breaks my heart. But I think what happens is these ideologies, these extremely punishing ideologies that would criminalize human sexuality are often highly linked with sexual violence.
Okay. David, what about you? What's your most underreported story of the week?
Yeah, there was a really great story at this new publication called airmail.news, and the headline is Loving Lies. And it's Stephen Glass, the most notorious fraud in journalism, decided he would live by one simple rule: always tell the truth. Then he broke that rule. Some of you may have seen this one floating around this week, and it's a reported journalistic story updating people about Stephen Glass, who many of you probably are familiar with. Late 90s, he was a New Republic writer and was exposed for making up dozens and dozens of stories. And then there was that great movie made, Shattered Glass. I think it came out in about 2003 or so. It starred Hayden Christensen. Fantastic film so Washington, D.C. people, journalism people. It's a classic journalism film. And so this article just came out updating the world on, hey, what happened to this guy who, so horrified everybody. And it turns out I don't want to give away the story because you really have to read it. It's very well written and well reported. And it talks about he got married and what happened with his wife. And it's very moving. And it really, you see that he's found some redemption, and it sounds like he's become a better person, actually. So amidst all the negative and dark news that we have each week, it's nice to see, a villain that we've all knew about and was a pop culture type figure, actually turns out to have tried to become a better person and redeem himself. So definitely take that story, give it a read. It'll probably squeeze a few tears out. So
I'll definitely check that out. And that's a great place to end the show, because that's all the time we have for this edition of the Square Circle. Thanks to our wonderful guests, and thank you for watching or listening to the Square Circle. I'm Cecily Fernandez. Please subscribe to our channel and like the video, or better yet, give it a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. We'll see you next week.